The transport ship landed with a heavy thud that shook bones. He gripped his medical bag tightly and waited for the doors to open. Through the small window, he could see the military base stretched across the dusty planet's surface. Buildings made of metal and stone, soldiers walking between them, vehicles moving supplies from one place to another. Was a species known across the galaxy for their healing abilities. His people had 4 fingers on each hand, perfect for delicate surgery. They had 2 hearts which kept them calm when others would panic. Their skin was pale blue and their eyes were large and dark. For 30 cycles, had served the Galactic Alliance as a medical officer. He had treated hundreds of patients from dozens of species. He thought he had seen everything. But he had never worked with humans before. The Alliance had assigned him to a human combat unit. The war against them was not going well, and human soldiers were dying faster than medics could be trained. The Alliance needed experienced healers in the field. Had volunteered, though now, standing on this strange planet, he wondered if that had been a mistake. The transport doors opened. Hot, dry air rushed in, stepped out and looked around. The base was called Forward Base Echo 7. It was not impressive. The buildings looked old and worn. The ground was covered in reddish dust that got into everything. Soldiers moved with tired steps, their faces showing the weight of a long war. A human woman approached him. She was shorter than most humans he had seen in files, with black hair tied back and dark eyes that studied him carefully. She wore combat armor that had seen many battles, with scratches and burn marks on the surface. "You must be our new medic," she said. Her voice was calm but not cold. "I am of the medical corps. I have been assigned to support your unit." The woman nodded. "I'm Sergeant, welcome to the 47th. She paused and looked at his medical bag. "You ever been in combat before?" "I have treated combat injuries many times." "That's not what I asked." Was quiet for a moment. "No, I have not been in active combat." His expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened just a little. "Well, try not to die. We need good medics." She turned and walked toward the main building. Followed, his 4-fingered hand still holding his bag tightly. He noticed that other soldiers were watching him. Some looked curious. Others looked doubtful. One large man with a shaved head laughed and said something to his friend that could not hear. The barracks for the 47th were in the back of the base. It was a long building with rows of beds and personal storage boxes. When entered, he saw the unit for the first time. There were 12 humans in total. They were sitting on beds, cleaning weapons, playing cards, or talking in small groups. When walked in, they all stopped and looked at him. "Everyone this is," said. "He's our new medical officer. Try not to scare him away on the first day." A man stood up from his bed. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a long scar running across his jaw. His eyes were sharp, and he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had fought many battles. This was Lieutenant, the unit commander, had read his file. 15 years of combat experience, numerous awards for bravery, respected by everyone who served under him. "Welcome to the 47th, said. His voice was low and steady. "We're glad to have a trained medic with us. Things have been hard lately." "I will do my best to serve this unit," replied. Nodded and returned to his bed. One by one, the other soldiers introduced themselves. Was the heavy weapons specialist, a strong woman with a loud laugh and quick smile. She slapped on the shoulder so hard that he nearly fell over, handled communications. He was thin and wore glasses that he constantly adjusted. His fingers moved quickly, always tapping on something. And Minu were close friends who finished each other's sentences. Was quiet and kept to herself, but said she was the best at close combat in the entire unit. Was older than most of the others, with gray in his hair and lines on his face. He had a calm presence that made others feel safe. Collected rocks. She showed a small box filled with stones from different planets. "Every place we go, I take one," she explained, "so I don't forget." Talked about his dream of opening a restaurant after the war. He described dishes that had never heard of, speaking with such excitement that even the other soldiers smiled. Was the team's engineer, always fixing something or building something new from spare parts. The last soldier was the unit's sniper. He was young, probably the youngest in the group. He sat alone by a window, cleaning his rifle with slow, careful movements. When introduced him, he only nodded without speaking. His eyes were sharp but tired. That night lay on his assigned bed and listened to the sounds of the barracks. The humans talked and laughed. They argued about small things. They shared food they had brought from home, made a joke that did not understand, but everyone laughed anyway. He had studied humans before coming here. The Alliance databases described them as a warrior species, aggressive and unpredictable. They were supposed to be dangerous, driven by violence and competition. But what Saw was different. He saw people who cared about each other. He saw a family, not a military unit. It confused him. On his, soldiers were professional and distant. They did not share personal stories. They did not laugh together. Emotions were seen as weakness, something to be controlled and hidden. These humans seemed to do the opposite. They showed their feelings openly. They formed connections freely. It seemed inefficient. It seemed risky. In battle, caring too much about others could lead to mistakes, to hesitation, to death. But as watched them, something stirred in his chest, something he could not name. These humans were not what he expected. They were loud and messy and emotional, but there was warmth in this room. There was life. For the first time in his long career, felt like an outsider. Not because the humans rejected him, but because he did not know how to be part of what they had. He closed his eyes and listened to their voices until sleep finally came. The mission briefing was held in a small room filled with maps and screens. Lieutenant stood at the front, pointing to images of a planet called Velar 3. It was a mining colony that they had attacked 3 weeks ago. All communication with the colony had stopped. The Alliance feared the worst. "Our job is simple," said in his calm voice. "We go in, find out what happened, look for survivors, and gather information on enemy positions. We are not there to fight unless we have to." Listened carefully. He had studied them in preparation for this assignment. They were a hive species, meaning they worked together like insects. Each warrior was connected to a queen who controlled them. Individuals did not think for themselves. They followed orders without question. They felt no fear. They felt no mercy. The Alliance had been at war with them for 2 years. Colony after colony had fallen. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply consumed everything in their path, taking resources and leaving nothing behind. The transport ship took 6 hours to reach Velar 3, sat in the back, checking his medical supplies again and again. His hands were steady, but his mind was not. This was different from working in a hospital. Out there, he would be in real danger for the first time in his life. Sat down next to him. She was checking her rifle, her movements smooth and practiced. "You look nervous," she said without looking up. "I am preparing myself mentally for what we might find." Smiled a little. "That's one way to say it." She finished with her rifle and looked at him directly. "Listen, when we land, stay close to me. If fighting starts, get behind cover and stay there until someone needs medical help. Don't try to be a hero, just do your job." "I understand." "Good." She stood up to return to her seat, then paused. "And it's okay to be scared. Everyone is, even if they don't show it." The ship landed on the edge of the mining colony. The air was cold and smelled of smoke. Buildings stood in silence, their windows dark and doors hanging open. No people, no movement, only the wind pushing dust across empty streets. The 47th moved in 2 groups, led the first with Minu and led the second with and. They moved slowly through the colony, checking each building for survivors. They found none. What they found instead were bodies, human colonists lying where they had fallen. Men, women, children. They had not spared anyone, had seen death before, but not like this. Not so many, not so brutal. Keep moving, said quietly. Her face was hard but could see the pain in her eyes. They continued through the colony until they reached the central square. That was when everything changed. Contact left. His voice exploded through the communication device. Patrol, at least 30 hostiles. The sound of plasma fire filled the air. Saw shapes moving between buildings, tall figures with dark shells and multiple legs. The warriors were terrifying in person. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with armored bodies and claws that could cut through metal. Their eyes glowed red in the shadows. A plasma bolt struck the ground near his feet. He froze. His body would not move. His mind went blank with fear. This was nothing like training. This was real death coming for him. Then grabbed his arm and pulled him hard behind a fallen wall. "Stay down," she shouted. "Stay here and wait for wounded." She was gone before he could answer, running toward the fighting with her rifle raised. Pressed himself against the wall, listening to the chaos around him. Explosions, screams, the terrible shriek of warriors, the sharp crack of human weapons. He heard Lieutenant's voice through the communication device, calm as always. "Cover the left side. Minyu, move to flank. Find high ground and start taking them down." The humans moved like water around stones. They did not panic. They did not run. Even with 30 enemy warriors against 12 soldiers, they fought as if they had done this 1,000 times. Watched Minyu get hit in the shoulder by a plasma bolt. The man fell, but only for a moment. He grabbed his rifle with his other hand and kept firing, his face tight with pain but his aim still true. He watched sprint across open ground, fire striking the dirt around her feet. She should have died. Any logical calculation said she should have died, but she made it to cover and continued fighting. He watched engage a warrior in close combat. She was half its size, but she moved like wind, dodging its claws and striking at weak points in its armor until it fell. Then fell. The communication specialist collapsed near his position, blood spreading from a wound in his side. Without thinking, ran to him. Plasma fire scorched the air above his head, but he did not stop. He grabbed and dragged him behind cover. "Hold still," said, his medical training taking over. He opened his bag and began working. The wound was bad but not fatal if treated quickly. His hand started shaking as he tried to close the damaged blood vessels. Here appeared beside him, breathing hard. She grabbed his arm and held it steady. "I've got him, just work." Worked. He sealed the wound, stopped the bleeding, and stabilized his condition. The whole process took 4 minutes. It felt like 4 hours. When he finished, the fighting had stopped. The patrol was dead. The 47th had won. But victory felt hollow. 3 soldiers were wounded. Minyu, and all needed treatment, moved between them, doing what he could with limited supplies. His hands shook so badly that had to help hold each patient steady. When it was over, sat against a wall and tried to breathe. His entire body was trembling. His 2 hearts were beating so fast he thought they might burst. Sat down next to him. She was covered in dust and blood, but her expression was calm. "You did good," she said. "I was terrified," admitted. "I could barely move, I could barely think." "But you moved anyway. You thought anyway, that's what matters." She looked at the sky, where smoke was still rising from destroyed buildings. "Fear is normal. Fear keeps you alive. The trick is learning to work through it." Looked at her. "How do you do it? How do you fight when you're afraid?" Was quiet for a moment. "I think about the people next to me. I think about what happens to them if I don't fight. Fear for yourself is weak. Fear for others, that makes you strong." She stood up and offered him a hand, took it and let her pull him to his feet. "Come on," she said. "We need to get the wounded back to base. You've got more work to do." Followed her back to the transport ship. His legs were weak and his mind was spinning. But somewhere deep inside, something had changed. He had faced death today. He had been terrified, and he had done his job anyway. It was not much, but it was a start. The weeks after Velar 3 were filled with more missions. Some were quiet, others were violent, treated burns, cuts, broken bones, and plasma wounds. He learned to work faster and stay calmer, but the fear never went away. It was always there, waiting in his chest like a cold stone. He began to watch the humans more closely. At first, he had thought they were naturally brave. The Alliance databases said humans were a warrior species. They were supposed to be aggressive and fearless. But the more time spent with the 47th, the more he realized this was wrong. Humans were not fearless. They were full of fear. They just hid it well. One night could not sleep. He walked outside the barracks to look at the stars. The sky on this planet was different from his. The stars were fewer and dimmer, but they still brought him some comfort, reminding him that the universe was vast and his problems were small. He found sitting alone on a storage crate near the fence. The young sniper was staring at the sky, his hands resting on his knees. Even from a distance, could see that those hands were trembling. "May I join you?" asked. Looked at him for a moment, then nodded, sat on a nearby crate. They were quiet for a while, just looking at the stars together. "Tomorrow's mission is dangerous," said finally. His voice was soft and tired. Had attended the briefing. The 47th was being sent to attack a communication station. The station was heavily protected, with walls, weapons, and hundreds of warriors. Taking it down would help the Alliance, but the cost would be high. "Yes," agreed. "The probability of injuries is significant." "The probability of death is significant," corrected. He kept staring at the sky, not meeting his eyes. "I'm scared. Every time I'm so scared." Was surprised. Was one of the best soldiers in the unit. During missions, he was calm and precise. His shots never missed. He had saved many lives with his skills. It was hard to imagine him being afraid. "You do not appear scared during combat," said. Laughed, but there was no happiness in it. "That's the trick, isn't it? Don't let them see, don't let anyone see." He finally looked at. His eyes were wet with tears he was trying to hold back. "Before every mission I feel sick. My hands shake. My heart beats so fast I think it will explode. I keep thinking about all the ways I could fail." "What do you fear most?" "That I'll miss." His voice cracked. "That someone will die because I wasn't good enough, because my hands shook at the wrong moment, because I hesitated when I should have fired." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "The others trust me. They count on me to protect them. What if I let them down?" Did not know what to say. On his, showing emotion like this was considered weakness. But here, with this young human crying under alien stars, it did not feel weak. It felt honest. It felt brave. "Yet you continue to fight," said quietly. "What choice do I have?" Stared at his trembling hands. "The others are depending on me. The people back home who have never seen a warrior. The colonies that are still standing because soldiers like us keep fighting. How can I stop? How can I run away when so many people need me?" "That is bravery," said. Shook his head. "Bravery is not being afraid. I'm always afraid." "No," spoke with certainty he did not know he had. "My people have always believed that bravery means having no fear, but I think we were wrong. True bravery is not the absence of fear. True bravery is feeling afraid and doing the right thing anyway." Looked at him with wide eyes. "You really think so?" "I know so. I have watched you and the others for weeks. You are all afraid, every single one of you, but you fight anyway. You protect each other anyway. That is something my people could never understand." They sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, his hands stopped shaking. He looked at the stars again, and this time his expression was calmer. "Thank you," he said. "I needed to hear that. Thank you for telling me the truth. It helped me understand something important." The next morning, the 47th loaded onto transport ships and flew toward the communication station. Sat in the back, preparing his medical supplies. Around him, the soldiers checked their weapons and talked quietly among themselves. They all looked calm, professional. ready. But now could see what he had missed before. He could see the small signs of fear they were all hiding. The way gripped her weapon a little too tightly. The way kept checking the same equipment over and over. The way touched the pocket where she kept her collection of stones. They were all afraid, and they were all going anyway. The attack on the station was brutal. The fought with mindless ferocity, wave after wave throwing themselves at the human soldiers. Explosions shook the ground. Smoke filled the air. Screams mixed with the shriek of warriors and the thunder of weapons. Worked without stopping. He treated wound after wound, his hands moving faster than he thought possible. At some point, he stopped being afraid. There was no time for fear. There was only the next patient, the next wound, the next life to save. And through it all, he watched. The young sniper had found a position on a broken wall overlooking the battlefield. His rifle fired again and again, each shot finding its target. 14 warriors fell to his bullets that day. 14 enemies who would have killed his friends. His hands never shook once. When the battle ended and the station was destroyed, found sitting alone again. The sniper looked exhausted, his face covered in dirt and sweat. But he was alive. They were all alive. "Your hands did not shake," said. Looked at his hands, turning them over slowly. "No, they didn't." He looked up at with something like wonder. "I was still scared. But when I saw the others fighting, when I saw them counting on me, the fear became something else. It became focus. It became strength." "That is what I meant," said. "Fear can destroy you or it can make you stronger. The choice is yours." Smiled, a real smile this time. "You know, for someone who's never been in combat before, you're pretty wise." "I am learning from the best teachers." They walked back to the transport ship together, leaving the burning station behind them. Another mission complete. Another day survived, but knew he had learned something far more valuable than survival. He had learned what bravery truly meant, and it was nothing like what he had been taught. The attack came in the middle of the night. Was sleeping when the first explosion hit. The floor shook so hard that he fell out of his bed. Alarms started screaming. Red lights flashed everywhere. Outside, he could hear weapons firing and people shouting. "Everyone up," Lieutenant's voice cut through the chaos. "Assault force, this is not a drill. Get to defensive positions now." Grabbed his medical bag and ran outside. What he saw made his blood freeze. The sky was filled with drop ships, dark shapes descending like a swarm of insects. Thousands of warriors were already on the ground, pouring into the base from every direction. The perimeter fences were broken. Buildings were on fire. Soldiers were fighting and dying everywhere he looked. This was not a raid. This was an invasion. Appeared beside him, her face lit by the orange glow of flames. "Medical bay now. We're going to have a lot of wounded." He ran. The medical bay was on the other side of the base, and the path was a nightmare of fire and combat. Twice he had to dive behind cover as warriors passed nearby. Once, he saw a soldier get cut down by claws right in front of him. He wanted to stop and help, but the soldier was already dead. The medical bay was chaos when he arrived. Wounded soldiers were everywhere, lying on beds, sitting on the floor, leaning against walls. 3 other medics were already working, but they were overwhelmed. There were too many patients and not enough hands. Dropped his bag and started working. He moved from patient to patient, treating the worst wounds first. A young woman with plasma burns on her legs. A man with shrapnel buried in his chest. Another soldier who had lost an arm and was screaming in pain. "Help me," a medic shouted. She was trying to stop a soldier from bleeding out, but the wound was too big for her to handle alone. Rushed over and added his 4 hands to hers. Together, they managed to seal the wound just before the soldier died. Outside, the sounds of battle were getting closer. The door burst open and stumbled in, half carrying another soldier. The older man's face was covered in blood, but he barely seemed to notice. "They've broken through the north wall," he shouted. "We need everyone who can fight." He set down the soldier he was carrying, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at. "Take care of them," he said. Then he was gone, running back into the fight. Never saw him alive again. The battle raged for hours. Wave after wave of warriors crashed against the base's defenses. The humans fought like demons, pushing back each attack with rifles and grenades and bare hands when they had to. But the enemy was endless. For every warrior that fell, two more took its place. At some point, an explosion shook the medical bay so hard that part of the ceiling collapsed. Dust and debris filled the air. Two patients were buried under the rubble, and another medic dug them out with their bare hands, ignoring the cuts on their fingers. The communication device crackled with reports. "Is down, she needs medical support at the east gate." Then another voice. "Is holding Sector 3 alone, he needs backup now." Made a decision. He grabbed his emergency kit and ran outside, heading toward the east gate. The battle was even worse out here. Bodies lay everywhere, human and mixed together. Smoke burned his eyes. The screams of the dying filled his ears. He found behind a broken wall, holding her side. Blood was spreading between her fingers. She gasped. "I tried to help a wounded soldier. They caught me in the open." "Stay still." He opened his kit and began working. The wound was deep but clean. He could save her if he worked fast. But they found them. 3 warriors came around the corner, their red eyes glowing in the darkness. Hands froze. This was it. He was going to die here and was going to die with him. Then appeared. The quiet soldier moved like lightning, jumping between them with her combat knife. She was faster than anything had ever seen, cutting and dodging and striking. In less than 30 seconds, all 3 warriors were dead. She turned to, breathing hard. "Finish the job, I'll cover you." He finished. He sealed wound and helped her to her feet, led them back to the medical bay, killing 2 more along the way. She made it look easy, but could see the blood dripping from a wound on her shoulder that she was ignoring. By dawn, the attack was over. They had retreated, leaving behind mountains of dead warriors and a base that was barely standing. More than half the buildings were destroyed. Fires still burned in some areas. The air smelled of blood and smoke. Had worked through the entire night without stopping. His hands were covered in blood, both human and his own blue blood from cuts he did not remember getting. His body was exhausted, but his mind would not let him rest. There was one more duty to perform. The dead were gathered in the main square and laid out in a row. Someone had found blankets to cover them. There were so many, too many. Found lieutenant standing at the end of the row, staring at 4 bodies separate from the others. These were the fallen members of the 47th. Had survived, but 3 others had not. His friend from another squad who she had tried to save, who had held his position alone for almost an hour before being overwhelmed. And the older man who had told to take care of everyone. "I'm sorry," said his voice breaking. "I couldn't save them. I tried, but I couldn't save them." Turned to look at him. The lieutenant's face was covered in dirt and dried blood. His eyes were red from smoke or tears or both, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "You saved 17 people tonight," he said. "I watched you run through fire to reach wounded soldiers. I watched you keep working when the ceiling fell. I watched you put yourself in danger again and again to help others." He put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't apologize to me. Don't ever apologize." "But they died," whispered. "Yes, they did." His voice cracked slightly, the first time I'd ever heard it waver. "And tomorrow we'll mourn them. We'll remember their names. We'll tell stories about who they were and what they meant to us." He looked back at the bodies. "And then we'll keep fighting, because that's what they would have wanted. That's what being brave means. Not the absence of loss, the refusal to let loss destroy you." Stood there for a long time after walked away. He looked at the covered bodies and felt something he had never felt before. Grief. Real, deep, overwhelming grief for people who were not his species, not his family, not his kind. but also love. Love for the ones who had died protecting others. Love for the ones who still lived and would keep fighting. The sun rose over the ruined base. Somewhere, a soldier began to sing a human song. Others joined in, their voices rough and tired but still singing. Did not know the words, but he listened. He finally understood what made humans different. It was not their strength or their weapons or their tactics. It was their hearts. They loved so deeply that loss could not break them. They hurt so much that pain could not stop them. They were not a warrior species because they loved to fight. They were a warrior species because they loved too much to stop. The war lasted another 8 months after the fall of Echo 7. 8 months of battles and retreats and advances. 8 months of blood and fire and death. But also 8 months of something else. Something had never expected to feel. Hope. The humans never stopped fighting. Even when things looked impossible, even when they seemed unstoppable, they kept going. They rebuilt Echo 7. They trained new soldiers. They pushed back against the enemy inch by inch, world by world. And finally, the Queens asked for peace. The armistice was signed on a neutral space station in the middle of nowhere. Representatives from both sides gathered in a large room with white walls and cold lights. The Queens sent their most trusted advisors. The Galactic Alliance sent its best diplomats. And the 47th was there, what remained of it. Only 8 of the original 12 survived the war. Was there, her hair now streaked with gray though she was still young. Stood at the front, his face carrying new scars but his eyes still calm. Minu, and stood in a line behind him. They wore their dress uniforms, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. Stood with them. He was not wearing a medical uniform. He was wearing a human unit patch on his shoulder, the symbol of the 47th. Had given it to him the night before. "You earned it," she had said. "You're one of us now." He had cried. He did not try to hide it. The signing ceremony was quick and formal. Words were spoken. Documents were marked. The advisors left without speaking to anyone else. They did not understand peace. They only understood that their queens had ordered them to stop fighting. But for the humans, it meant everything. That night there was a celebration. Soldiers from every unit gathered in the station's largest hall, drinking and eating and telling stories. Laughter filled the air, real laughter, the kind that comes from relief and joy and the simple wonder of being alive. Sat at a table with the 47th. Was telling a story about something that had happened during the battle for a planet called 4. Her voice was loud. Her hands moving wildly as she described how she had fallen into a mud pit while chasing a warrior. And then, she said, barely able to speak through her laughter, the fell in two. We were both just lying there in the mud, staring at each other, covered in brown slime. Neither of us could get up. Everyone laughed, even smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Thought about everything that had led to this moment. The fear and the pain and the loss, the friends who would never see this day, and in all the others who had given their lives so that others could live. He thought about a night long ago when had found him sitting alone in the ruined medical bay after the fall of Echo 7. He had been overwhelmed by grief, not knowing how to process the deaths of people he had come to care about. She had sat beside him without speaking for a long time. Then, slowly, she had begun to tell him stories. Stories about terrible cooking. He had once made a stew that was so bad, half the unit got sick. But he had tried so hard to make everyone happy that no one had the heart to tell him. Stories about his dream of opening a restaurant after the war. He had planned the entire menu. He had even designed the logo. He used to talk about it for hours, describing every dish with such love that people would get hungry just listening. Stories about a soldier named who had died before joined the unit. She had loved to dance. Even on the worst days, she would find a moment to move to music only she could hear. "Why do you tell me these things?" had asked. "Because that's how we keep them alive," had said. "Memory, story, love." They think death ends everything. They don't understand that as long as we remember someone, as long as we carry them in our hearts, they're never truly gone. Now, sitting at this table surrounded by his friends, finally understood. They had always defined bravery as the absence of fear. If you felt no fear, you were brave. Simple, logical, wrong. They defined bravery as obedience, following orders without question, dying without hesitation, serving the hive above all. Efficient, cold, also wrong. Humans defined bravery differently. Bravery was not about ignoring fear. It was about facing fear and choosing to act anyway. Bravery was not about obedience. It was about love. Love for the person standing next to you. Love for the people waiting at home. Love strong enough to make you risk everything to protect what mattered. Bravery was trembling with fear before every battle but never missing a shot when his friends needed him. Bravery was running back into the fight when he could have stayed safe, because he could not stand by while others died. Bravery was taking the time to tell stories about the dead so they could live forever. Bravery was hope in the face of darkness, love in the face of loss, life in the face of death. Returned to his a year after the war ended. He resumed his position at the Central Medical Academy, training the next generation of healers. But he was different now. His lectures included new concepts that confused and challenged his students. He spoke about courage, about sacrifice, about the power of connection and the strength that came from caring about others. His colleagues thought he had gone strange. The administrators questioned whether his time with humans had damaged his thinking. Some students complained that his ideas were unscientific, too emotional, too human. But occasionally, a young would approach after class. Their large dark eyes would be filled with curiosity as they asked questions about these strange concepts. What did it feel like to be afraid and act anyway? How could love make someone stronger instead of weaker? Why did humans cry for their dead and then keep fighting? Would invite them to sit. He would make them tea, a habit he had picked up from the humans, and then he would begin to tell stories. About stew that made everyone sick but filled everyone's heart. About a restaurant that was never built but was described so beautifully that it felt real. About trembling hands that never shook when it mattered. About rocks, sitting now on a shelf in his office, each one a memory of a world she had visited and survived. About's lesson that the dead live on through story and love. And as he told these stories, he would watch his students' faces change. He would see something spark in their eyes, something that looked like understanding, something that looked like hope. He knew most of them would not truly understand. His people were too different, too logic-focused, too afraid of emotion. But some would. Some would carry these ideas forward. Some would learn what he had learned, that bravery was not about having no fear. Bravery was about loving something more than you feared losing it. That was what humans had taught him. That was what real bravery meant. And every time he told their stories, the soldiers of the 47th lived again, just as had promised. They lived in his words, in his memories, in the hearts of everyone who heard about them. They would live forever. And that, new, was the most human thing of all.